In problem 36, once again, we're after a triple bar. So hopefully this is beginning to become familiar for you. Some of these steps ought to be routine by now. But we know we're either dealing with two horseshoes joined by a dot or two dots joined by a wedge. So only one possibility here, one rule that is, two possibilities for us to finish up 36. We just need to figure out which one we're ultimately going to have to finish off with. So only two lines to work with. And as always, let's think about what we can do here. Right off the bat, just examining these two lines, there's not a whole heck of a lot that seems to be obvious. But once again, material implication, told you it was an incredibly handy rule. Once again, impl is the way to go. So what can we do here? Well, we can do impl to both of these lines. We would need to introduce some tildes into line number 2 and going from wedge to horseshoe. So we'll save that for later. So what could we do to line number 1? How can we pull off impl? Well, there are two possibilities. We can do impl to the main operator, or we can do impl just to the horseshoe here inside of parentheses, just to the consequent, or as it turns out, as the case might be, we can do impl to both horseshoes. So let's do, first of all, impl to the main operator. One impl, switch that horseshoe to a wedge, and horseshoe to wedge, add a tilde. So we get not T or, and the rest of it stays the same, not parentheses A horseshoe N. So now let's do impl to the second horseshoe. This time 3 impl. First part will stay the same, not T or, not parentheses. Switch this horseshoe to a wedge, add a tilde, not A, wedge N, close parentheses. So that's the end result of doing two consecutive impls essentially to line number 1. So the question now becomes, what can we do to line number 4? Well, here an obvious step ought to jump out at you. We can do De Morgan's just to the second disjunct of 4. So for De Morgan's, the first disjunct will stay the same, not T or, distribute this tilde, not A, and I'm going to just throw in a double negation to my tagline. Not A, we obviously know is A. Operator starts as a wedge, switch it to a dot, not N. So that's the end result of doing De Morgan's just on the second disjunct of 4. Now, obviously, we want to know what can we do to line 5. And here, this is the textbook case of distribution. Distribute this lead variable, the not T, to the A, and then the not T to the not N. Operator starts as a wedge, main operator that is, switch it to a dot, use the wedge as the leftovers, put in your groupings, and that's 5 distribution. So now the main operator becomes a dot, and we're really not concerned with this first conjunct. It's got an A in it, and we don't want an A. We want the not T or not N. So that's easy enough to get. Again, I'll combine two steps, pretty routine here. Flip the order of the conjuncts, and then simplify. And we get not T or not N. Now let's return to our conclusion. We need two horseshoes joined by a dot, or two dots joined by a wedge, and it's increasingly becoming clear that we really want two horseshoes joined by a dot. So let's explore what that would look like. T horseshoe not N, and not N horseshoe T. Can we do one of those two things? Can we get one of those two horseshoe statements out of line number 7? Of course, it's got all the right variables. We just want it to be a horseshoe, and that's easy enough. Once again, impl comes in handy. Wedge to horseshoe, take away a tilde from the front. We just so happens that we just happen to have one here. So not T becomes T. Switch that wedge to a horseshoe, not N, and half the battle is now done. We've got the first conjunct here of ultimately what we want to pull off that material equivalence. We've got the T horseshoe not N. That much is done. What we now need is the not N horseshoe T. And there is where we're going to have to manipulate line number 2. So I'll leave you to finish this problem off. The question again, to be clear, how can you take line number 2, T wedge N, and turn it into not N horseshoe T? Then all you have to do is conjunction and material equivalence, and you'll be done. So you need to get this wedge to a horseshoe. Wedge to horseshoe, you've got to take away a tilde, but there's no tilde there. Further, you want not N horseshoe T, and your variables are out of order. You want the N to be first, the T to be second. So you've got a number of intermediate steps before you can pull that off, but you ought to be able to get that no problems whatsoever now that I've tipped you off as to the plan of attack.